Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about your book, Harder to Breathe, a memoir of making Maroon5, losing it all, and finding recovery. I'm so excited to not only talk to you about, your experience as, rock star and living that lifestyle, but finding new purpose and new meaning through this experience that we share of addiction and recovery. So thank you so much for your time today. Can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, been looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we're going to play a little game, a little warm-up game I like to call the lightning round, which is very slow, actually, in reality. When you first got sober, was there a recovery book that really helped you?
A recovery book. Certainly the big book of AA helped me. NA actually has a book that's similar, but maybe a little bit more modern now.
Yeah.
It was really more about being in rooms with people than it was about reading books for me. But there's a book that's not about recovery specific to addiction that I found really helpful just in terms of sitting with the present moment, which is Full Catastrophe Living. It's about mindfulness. The guy who popularized mindfulness for mental health, Jon Kabat-Zinn, wrote this book. The first 150 pages of it or so are about the whole experience of radical acceptance of the present moment, which for an addict, of course, is a difficult thing, right? Sitting in the present.
Yeah. I often say that the purpose of addiction is distraction. It's the distraction from the present moment that is unacceptable for a variety of reasons at times.
Exactly. That's why mindfulness has been so helpful for me.
Jon Kabat-Zinn, oddly enough, I am a voracious reader, but I have not read anything from him. So I will definitely put this on the list.
There you go.
Do you have a go-to mantra or quote that you live by?
Yeah, actually, there's a quote by Seneca, the Roman philosopher.
Seneca.
Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
So good. I did not know that was a Seneca thing. I heard Oprah say it and I was like, man, must be her.
Yeah, I didn't know who it was either. It was something I heard somebody say somewhere, and then I finally looked it up because I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
In recovery, if you're a spiritual person, a lot of people talk about, God or the universe rewarding you,
Right.
or, good fortune coming to those who stay on the path of recovery. And I do believe in that, whether or not it's a spiritual thing or not. But I think for me, it's about when you've done the work, when you're staying open and growing, when opportunities arise, you notice them more and you're able to move towards them and act on them, and you know what to do with them, as opposed to when you're not doing the work and stuck in your disease or whatever you want to call it. That opportunity comes and you don't even notice it,
because you're high.
Right.
Because you're blacked out.
That would prevent,
yeah. No, I love Seneca. All the Stoic philosophers. There's the Tao of Seneca is also really good. Awesome. Love that. Do you have a regular self-care routine? And that can be either a daily routine or a weekly routine. And I recently even talked to somebody who included an annual retreat that they do. I thought that was really interesting. So do you have something like that you follow?
Definitely. I've found that structure is definitely helpful to keep me moving in the right direction. So I try to maintain some consistent patterns or rituals of self-care. One is just sleep, in terms of getting to bed at a reasonable hour and getting up relatively early. I find that when I'm asleep during the hours that the sun is down is probably good for my sort of circadian.
Oh, you can be getting more sleep lately.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I mean, for me, it's I have to prioritize sleep, definitely, and that's part of it. But every morning I stretch, and I do my mindfulness meditation while I'm stretching. So it's kind of a yoga-ish kind of thing.
Okay.
But it's, loosening up the body and just really sitting in the present moment. And because so much of the time, we wake up in the morning, we have a cup of coffee, and we're just like looking at everything we got to get done that day immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
You take just 15, 20 minutes to slow down, sit in the moment, breathe, feel your body, limber up, whatever you do to kind of just ease into the day a little bit more. I find that my whole day is a lot more relaxed and centered and balanced if I do that.
Absolutely. I like the idea of practicing the mindfulness with the stretching. A lot of times people tell me, especially in early recovery, that they can't meditate.
Yeah.
And I often wonder what their definition of meditation is, right? Sometimes people think it's absence of thought,
Right.
when in reality, it's more like fishing for thoughts. As soon as you recognize you're thinking, you just bring it back to the breath. And it is this practice of notice and coming back. So that's typically what my practice, but I like the idea of combining it with the somatic practice of stretching. Is it like an informal yoga thing, or do you just have like a regular stretch routine?
Yeah, I would say it's informal yoga because I was
Hmm.
never really one who went to a bunch of yoga classes or anything like that, but I picked up a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
I just kind of created my own routine that kind of feels right for me and my body and just centers me.
Yeah. Bring it back to the present moment. Do you have experiences during this process where like emotions come up that need to be addressed and resolved?
Yeah, definitely. Part of the reason why I like to do it first thing in the morning is because before anything has happened, before I've even like looked at an email, you know,
Social media.
yeah, exactly. I find myself after I do that, center myself, I'm able to react to things with a little bit more calm. You turn on the news and you see what happened today. It's like if you've done a little mindfulness meditation, it's much easier to stay balanced.
Yeah. Staying balanced, emotional balance, right? That's so important. What's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
Hmm. Well, early on in recovery, I remember at least one person, if not a couple people, telling me, in a year, you're going to be in a totally different place. In 2 years, you won't even be able to really recognize, the person you were when you were in your disease. And at 5 years, you're going to be doing things that you couldn't even possibly imagine right now. Life is going to be in places and take you on journeys that you couldn't have fathomed. And I just thought that was like ridiculous. I was like, I don't even know how to wrap my head around that.
Right.
But absolutely were they right when they said that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's no way that I could have really envisioned where my life would be in 5 years, but I think just hearing that, and knowing that if you if you stay on the path and you keep moving forward and allowing yourself to grow, you will find yourself in places you couldn't have imagined.
That is so true. I love that. And something that I've been talking about lately is this idea of a spiritual experience. A lot of times when people are first considering getting sober, there's this higher power idea that is presented that's tough to get around. And because so many people associate it with religion, like they don't have a definition of spirituality that doesn't include religion. And I'm curious to know about I find the spiritual experiences, like the actual practical experience, is so helpful for people to identify. Do you have something that is along those lines?
Yeah, that was a tough one for me because I was one of those guys who didn't really identify as spiritual, or I don't know if I really had a working definition for what spirituality was. I just kind of chalked it up to either religion, or belief in God, or some kind of new age kind of idea of spirituality that I always thought was kind of frou-frou, or I had my hangups and my prejudices about what spirituality meant until I realized that I was having spiritual experiences in early recovery and realized that I had to expand my definition to fit what I was experiencing, which was just connection. Really, that's what spirituality is for me. It's feeling connected to something outside of myself, because so much of addiction is being isolated in your little world, and your higher power is really your drug of choice, right? You've made the bottle your higher power. And so replacing that with anything, I mean, even just replacing it with nature, going out into the world and experiencing a real present moment of life and nature around you, that's a spiritual experience. Feeling connected to people in your life and reaching out, meeting new people, um, having a real genuine connection with another human being is an absolute spiritual experience. So for me, it's really just about staying open and finding those connections wherever they are. I realized I actually had spirituality in my life. I just didn't know that's what it was. Of course, being a creative person, being musical, I found spirituality in that, in my connection to the guys in my band. When you're playing music with somebody and it really clicks, when you have chemistry, that's a spiritual connection. So it's really just about connection for me.
That idea of chemistry, because it's so practical, and it speaks to energy, and to me kind of that makes a lot of sense, right? The energy, the physical, emotional experience that we have, it's so personal. Once you have like a personal experience, it's really hard to deny
Yeah.
the presence of something, even if you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Man, I would imagine being on stage and performing and being in that flow, that must have felt like a spiritual experience as well.
Flow. That's another book. Have you ever read that book?
Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes, absolutely.
What's the name of the book though?
Well, there's Flow and there's Finding Flow.
Oh, okay. Are they both written by Mikhail?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's
Csikszentmihalyi.
pronounced
Yeah.
Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. I've heard his name butchered in so many ways. I'm not sure which is correct anymore.
I'll take your word for it.
Flow. We'll just call it, look for
Yeah.
Flow.
The Flow guy.
Yeah, the Flow guy.
Oh,
Well, that's it for my little lightning rounds. And I would be remiss if I didn't sort of touch on, your experience in the band. People are going to want to know, what was it like to win a Grammy or be on stage and do all the fun stuff. And of course, we'll talk about it as it relates to alcohol, but maybe you just tell me in your own words, like, what were those good times like for you? And were you drinking during those times, or how did that work for you?
most of the best memories I have in my life, and in particular in the band, did not involve any alcohol.
Oh,
The
that's
ones that I
awesome.
remember certainly.
That might be a reason why.
No, but it goes back to that what we were talking about in terms of connection and spirituality and flow, because I was in the band for over a decade, and we were not successful or famous for 8 years of that. So most of it was just the work and the process and growing together and discovering new identities as a band and individually, pushing each other, and expanding our horizons. So it really was that process of flow, creatively, and just as young men growing up in the world, and trying to find our place in the world. That really was the stuff that I think about, and with the fondest memories. I have so many great memories of just like, the chemistry in a rehearsal, just coming together and writing a song, and that magic happening where something just clicks. And the camaraderie, you just four guys and then five guys in a van, driving ourselves around the country over and over again, delirious and just making each other crack up. Like, those memories, not the glamorous ones, that's the stuff that comes to mind when I think about how great that time in my life was.
That's really beautiful. I mean, that speaks to like how authentic and deep your relationships are with those people.
Yeah.
Your band. I was going to say, if you're in a van together that much, y'all better like each other.
Yeah, you better be able to get along on some level if you're going to be that in close quarters.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe you can maybe we can try. I know you were kind of a late bloomer when it comes to drinking. When did you really start feeling like your drinking was becoming a problem?
Well, it was an evolution, of course. No one starts drinking and thinking, I'm going to be a problem drinker.
Right.
When I started, yeah, it was late in the game for a lot of people, because I was in my 20s when I started drinking more recreationally, and it was just fun at first. It was romantic, good times with friends, just facilitating the party kind of thing. When it became a problem was when it turned into self-medication. It became escape and avoidance of reality. And the intention was not to take a good time and make it better. It was to take a horrible feeling and run away from it, or escape it in some way. And then it became heavier drinking and more consistent drinking and drinking, just almost taking on an alter ego. Like, I'm just going to pretend like I'm not feeling this pain right now, and I'm just going to pretend like uh, I'm a rock star and I'm just having a great time. And that's maybe what it looked like on the outside. Maybe it was really transparent. Maybe people could see that I was actually suffering, but that's when it became a problem looking at it now.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to cover those horrible feelings, we try to pretend like everything's fine, but what was underlying those feelings of emotional? I know you had some physical pain too. What was underlying the pain?
The physical pain was part of it, but it definitely was much deeper than that. It was a mind, body, and spirit breakdown that I was experiencing. Um, because yes, it was physical. My body was deteriorating playing on the road for a few years there straight. And I had shoulder issues and then, all of my joints basically, but started in my right shoulder and it progressed to having nerve issues, which made it hard in terms of just coordinating things that were used to be easy. But at the same time, there was this psychological element in terms of feeling like I was a failure, feeling like I was defective in some way.
Mm.
And just the amount of pressure I put on myself, the perfectionism, and external and internal pressure kind of escalating to a point where I felt overwhelmed and started breaking down physically, but also just mentally and emotionally and spiritually. I just at a certain point felt broken and had no idea how to fix it. The hardest part about it was that I couldn't even really verbalize it at that point because I couldn't really understand what I was going through, let alone share it with somebody. So the guys around me, it just kind of became this thing we didn't talk about at all because they knew there was something going on with me, but um, obviously couldn't really fully understand it. They were young men as well. Like what really could they do? They weren't therapists. So it was just like kind of waiting to see if Ryan's going to get better. And is it just his shoulder or is there something else going on? And I went to every kind of doctor you can go to, and after a while, it just felt like nothing was going to work, and I just had this deep down feeling of, like I said, feeling defective. So that's when really the drinking became, self-medicating this not just physical pain, but emotional and psychological and spiritual pain.
It's so interesting how there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And
Yeah,
it talks about how sometimes emotional distress will manifest as physical symptoms.
yeah.
I've heard it say that back pain is very similar, things like that. And and so do you feel like as the attention you were getting was escalating, the amount of output that was, the demands on you were increasing, that there was that sense of, fear of failure or being exposed for that not good enough or being defective? Do you think your body manifested those things?
Yeah, it was a combination of a lot of elements, and that was a big part of it as things really ramped up for us. I think that there was definitely that imposter syndrome, because I taught myself to play the drums. I never took lessons,
Okay.
and I got really good really fast. But it was, I was a big fish in a small pond in terms of I was the drummer at my school. I was there were a few drummers, but I was the guy that people wanted in their band because I was athletic and I could play really hard and really fast, and I was a hard rock guy. And uh, so I just like I had a lot of pride and a lot of defensiveness about doing things or learning things that didn't come easy to me because I felt like, oh, I'm already really good. And I'm not proud of that. That's, something else I wish I had known when I was younger. It's just like, uh, you know, being open to suggestion, open to learning and growing. But I was like, hey, I'm this good on my own. Why do I need to take lessons at this point? So when it came to touring and promoting a major record, and all of a sudden you have your songs on the radio all over the country and then all over the world, um, and it crosses over into the world of pop stardom, and we're on stages with the biggest artists in the world, with the best musicians you could possibly find. And I was just in awe. I was like, this is a little different. This is not my parents' garage anymore, you
It's a
know?
little different. It's putting it mildly.
Right. So there definitely was that imposter syndrome, is like, wait a second, I don't belong here. Like, these people like went to Juilliard and, you know, Berkeley School of Music, and they've been picked from the cream of the crop to back up Sheryl Crow or, you know, Carlos Santana or whoever the massive star was that had the best musicians playing behind them. And so, you know, I definitely felt like there was something missing in my education as a drummer. But then it was also just, you know, putting a lot of pressure on myself. And then when that ramped up to external pressure, like, for instance, we started playing on TV, late night shows, and I had this constant dread of, we're going to do a live TV performance at some point on an award show or on Saturday Night Live. And there's going to be millions of people watching, and I'm going to drop my stick or something. You know, that was just something
Did
that
that
was,
ever happen? Did you ever drop your stick?
I mean, I would drop my stick on stage a lot. I would break sticks or drop sticks, and wasn't a big
Is that
deal.
normal?
I probably did it more than most because I didn't have good technique, and in the early days I hit really hard, so I was cracking sticks like 4 per show.
Wow.
But dropping the stick probably just had to do with the fact that I didn't have good technique, so my fingers weren't really holding the sticks properly. But in the course of a rock show, you know, you drop a stick, you pick another one up, like no one really notices in the midst of all the chaos. But when you're on TV and it's under a microscope and you have one song and you drop a beat for a bar, like everyone's going to notice that. So I was always really fearful of that. Thankfully it didn't happen. We did play on Saturday Night Live and it went pretty well.
How fun.
So I was thankful that worked out, but it was still just that kind of level of external and internal pressure leading to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You know, you think about the external pressure when you're at that level. Did you receive any criticism that really hurt you, or was everybody mostly nice to you? Or how was that?
The guys in the band did become critical at a certain point, understandably so. And they were nice about it. They weren't. We could argue about everything in our band, but it was always respectful. Like, we were very diplomatic. We were like family, you know. If there was a concern or a frustration, we would talk about it and we would argue about it, but it would be in the context of trying to work something out, you know, which is, I think, rare. I didn't realize how rare that is in bands, because every other person I've ever met who's been in a band has like horror stories about how there's, you know, just like usually either chaos or just vindictiveness and hidden resentments. And you know,
Yeah.
we were pretty civil with each other and loved each other, so that was good. But
That's interesting. The criticism that that came to mind was within the band, not external criticism from people who didn't know you.
well, certainly their opinions mattered most to me. You know, they were the guys that we were in this together. We were a band of brothers, you know. We started this thing together in my parents' garage, and we took it all the way to the biggest stages in the world. So of course their opinions mattered to me as much as anyone. There wasn't much external criticism. I think maybe once our manager called us out for a performance on a show that we did that was a little lackluster, and I knew it was my issue because it was, I counted off the song a little slow and the energy was not there and I was a little stiff. He didn't direct it at me though, but I took it to mean what I thought it meant.
You took it personally? How weird.
Yeah. But the other guys in the band though, you know, they started noticing things that were just kind of breaking down over time. And I think the reason why they obviously were concerned because we were promoting this record and we didn't have the luxury of not being at our best on any given night. But also just, I had been the rock in the band, you know, I was the guy who laid it down that they all followed. And then all of a sudden I was, you know, dropping a beat here and there or flubbing something that I usually wouldn't, or just like slowing down or kind of playing too slowly, or so they would point some of those things out to me more with concern
Mhm.
than with criticism. More just kind of like, what happened there? What's going on? Are you not trying hard enough or something? And,
Right.
and of course, no, that was not the problem. It was the opposite. It was that I was trying too hard, you know,
Right.
really putting a lot of pressure on myself and focusing to the point of just really hyper vigilant about the
Right.
minutia of everything I was doing. So that was what was taking its toll on me.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting aspect about, when we become addicted to things, right? We are so controlling about everything. And it's so ironic and maybe counterintuitive that we then start drinking and we completely lose control. It's like this crazy, teeter totter effect. I mean, that's one of the things that's so crazy about when you lose control. It's just this complete, like, polar opposite of how you are usually like trying to be in control. I wanted to note something I heard on another interview. You had mentioned that you had had many insights once you started your process. You got your master's degree, or you're in the process of getting certified as a or licensed. Is it
Yeah,
licensed marriage family therapist?
right. I'm a
LMFT.
LMFT. That's the license. Right now, I'm a AMFT, an associate marriage and family therapist.
Yeah, that's a lot of school. That's a lot of school. And it's also a lot of internal work. And I feel like that's when a lot of the insights come. And you mentioned a story about an insight that you had in your recovery work around a relationship or an experience that you had with your mom when you you got spanked for running out into the street. Can you tell me a little bit about the insights that you had around that?
Yeah, that was an interesting breakthrough I had that I didn't have in therapy. It was actually in a grad school class. It was group therapy was the class, and so we were all kind of sharing with our colleagues or our fellow students um, our own personal stories and kind of therapizing each other in a group therapy kind of thing. There was a question that was kind of just a stimulus for conversation. I had always wondered, why was I so perfectionistic? Why did I put so
Mhm.
much pressure on myself um, to be at my best and to achieve and to always be, um, really pushing myself to be at my best? Um, because my parents were not overtly, they didn't put pressure on me to succeed. There was never like a premium put on outcome. My brother and I were both high achieving kids and students and everything. But it wasn't because my parents were like, you have to achieve, or like they were mad if I didn't. Like they were very loving and very supportive. I considered myself extremely lucky to have such a warm, supportive family. Um, the breakthrough that came was just that, trauma and anxiety and depression are inherited traits sometimes. They're intergenerational. And partly it's just genetics, but I believe that everything is a combination of nature and nurture. You might have a predisposition that's similar to one or both of your parents. Um, but then there's also just like what happens in your life that creates or exacerbates certain proclivities you have. And I always related to my mom. My mom is a really sensitive person, a really warm, um, like a delicate soul, like an old soul, just really sweet. But prone to anxiety and depression because she has her sensitivities and she had some traumas in her own life. Um, and so I just always related to her. I just thought that I had a similar temperament to her. But it was in this class in grad school that I realized I probably on some level wanted to make her feel better. I wanted
Mhm.
if she was anxious or she was upset about something, I wanted to cheer her up, you
Yeah.
know. So there's this story that I put in the book about her, the one and only time that she spanked me. And she was just really upset, having to do that because she didn't want to do that. But she had to let me know, that running out into the street is not okay. I had to learn that immediately. So she had to show me. And I just remember her crying when she was spanking me. And so like that's what I took away from it was like my mom was upset doing that. It was not that I was embarrassed or that it hurt or all the things that you would think, being spanked would, what the impression it would leave on you. It was more like,
Mhm.
I don't like seeing my mom, upset. So yeah, I don't know, both of my parents were just so happy for me and my brother and our successes that I have to believe on some level, me pushing myself to be good at things and to be responsible and to be the good kid, was really just wanting to make my parents happy, you know?
I thought that was so interesting, this idea of being responsible for your mom's feelings, right? And I had that I had that experience as well, feeling I had an older sister with mental illness. And so I was, my mom was like, "Oh, we need to save your sister." And I began this pattern of taking responsibility for other people's behavior
Mhm.
and became this person that I would set aside my own feelings to or my own wants and needs to care for others. And through the book, I saw this repeating pattern of, you talked about somebody losing their jacket all the time. I forget who that was.
Adam.
That was Adam. He left his jacket every, so you were like kind of the parent of the group, kind of. And so it's interesting just how those early experiences then sort of set the stage for the rest of your life.
It's amazing because it wasn't conscious, it
No.
wasn't like I was, and I didn't feel like on any other level I was parentified or anything like that, that I needed to take care of my parents. They were very, um, they were very responsible adults. And, but, if for me, I just became the responsible one in most of my relationships. And it was, like I said, it wasn't like consciously, I need to take care of other people first. It was more from a place of just kind of, uh, being anal, I guess. That's what that's what
Well,
the
I mean,
guys.
people do that because, I mean, control speaks to needing to be safe,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Mm.
you do talk a lot about anxiety and depression. Do you have a sense of when you started to experience anxiety?
Yeah, I didn't even really have that word for it when I first experienced it. Um, I was a teenager and I was at a school where in some ways I fit in other ways I really didn't. It was a very wealthy private prep school in West LA, called Brentwood High School, um, and a very exclusive place to be. And everyone there is expected to go on. Talk about pressure, expected to go on to an Ivy League school or at the very least, Cal Berkeley or Stanford or something in state. Um, so there was just a different dynamic there. I had gone to a public elementary school and seen a much more diverse kind of student body there. And at this private school, it was like a lot of really wealthy kids. And my family was fine and we did well. We were middle class and we weren't struggling or anything. But just compared to these extremely wealthy kids from Brentwood and the Palisades and Encino, Malibu, um, I felt a little out of place. Just the
Mhm.
kind of the vernacular and the attitude, to me just I felt a little alienated. So uh, I rebelled against that a little bit, and I had my own little tiny little group of friends. At first, it was baseball, and then it was the band. Um, and but a lot of the time, I just kind of felt this very uncomfortable feeling, like really separated from my disconnected from my surroundings was really what it felt like almost like I was in a sort of a cloud, and I would have this lump in my throat, and I remember just being really fixated on it and having to like clear my throat a lot or swallow, um, and so much so that I would start to get lightheaded because I was kind of like either hyperventilating or not breathing enough, I guess. And I remember thinking to myself, do other people feel this way, or is this just me? Is there something wrong with me? Again, I didn't have the word anxiety to put to it because I wasn't like worried about anything in particular, and I wasn't, all that high strung. I just felt really in my body, really self-conscious.
Self-conscious. That's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, and literally self-conscious, not like self-conscious like I wonder if I'm good enough, but like very conscious of my being, fixated on what it feels like to be in my body right now and how different, how separate it feels from my surroundings. So that's what really, looking back now, was my first experience with anxiety.
Do you feel like it was the anxiety that and depression that you were drinking, that you used drinking to cover or mask? Was that a mask for that?
Yeah, definitely. Because I was a shy kid, and I did have social anxiety, like even from the time I was little up through young adulthood. Like if you put me in a new group of people, more than just a couple people, um, I felt real uncomfortable. I didn't like parties.
Mm,
I didn't like, just anything where there was a lot of people and it was overwhelming to me. I just felt like it was
mm,
too much. Kind of an introvert by nature. I needed more time alone than I needed with
mm.
other people. But then when I tried, drinking socially in college and in my 20s, all that kind of went away at first.
Funny how that works.
Right. Well, it worked at first.
It does.
It definitely it allowed me to um in my mind feel like I was a better version of myself.
Oh, yeah,
I actually felt more present because of that feeling
right.
that I had felt of disconnection. A little bit of lubricant, made me feel like I could be present now. I could be connected to people. I can be my own kind of normal silly self with a larger group. And so in my mind, I was like, yeah, there's a certain amount that's just the right amount of buzz that makes me really kind of a better version of myself. And then that escalated, when you fast forward into the years when I was struggling, I felt like I needed to have a pretty strong buzz just to be comfortable in any situation.
Mm.
And that I was like, once I got drunk, I felt like, oh yeah, and like I said, I'm a rock star now. Like everyone likes me. I'm funny. I'm outgoing. Like I can flirt with the ladies. I can do all kinds of things. And that was all an illusion. I'm sure that if I saw myself in that state at that time, I would have been just disgusted with myself. And
Maybe, I mean,
well,
it's so interesting because when the self-consciousness is removed, then you are freer to be who you are, lighthearted and playful and just not so locked into the thinking.
right. But what's interesting looking back now is that all that came out in the good years of my drinking, I realize now that that all is in me anyway. I don't need alcohol to access.
Right.
Right? I just needed tools
That's
to figure out
that's
how
that's
to be
actually
more.
really profound, right? It was always within you.
It was always within me, and I find now that like when I'm in social situations, any situation, I have the resources within me to be comfortable, to be my normal natural self, to be outgoing, to be fun, to be silly. Um, it's just a matter of tapping into those resources. Yes, if you take something that lowers your inhibitions, you're going to access that part of you a little quicker.
Right.
But that
Ah,
doesn't mean that it's necessarily a better way, especially if it's just going to lead to a blackout. you know,
well, it feels like everything has a price tag,
right?
right? And some things you pay the price up front, like, or sometimes you pay it on the back end. Like with drinking, you pay it on the back end, right? Like you get the benefit right away, but then you pay for it later. Like the other example I like to use is like exercise. You pay the price up front in terms of like pain. It's painful to exercise, but then you get the benefit later. And that seems like a cleaner way to, live instead of using things that are going to cost you later, because those costs get bigger and bigger. And I'm just curious about, I know you had some experiences going to rehabs and things, but tell me a little bit about what it was like towards the end, like whether you became alcohol dependent when you decided that this was a problem. Was it when you left the band?
No, that when I left the band is when it just started to get really bad.
That's when it started.
Yeah, because I mean, it wasn't to the point where I would consider it a problem when I was still playing,
Mhm.
uh, because playing came first above everything. I mean, for all of us, being on stage and performing and being able to represent ourselves the way we wanted to was a priority over everything else. Um, so I don't remember. I mean, I remember a few times when I was a little buzzed or a little hungover on stage, but that was not the norm. I mean, in general, I remember being sober when I was performing. It was when I couldn't perform anymore and I didn't know what to do with myself and I was feeling really sorry for myself that it became a problem. And that lasted, once I left the band officially, I went really into a tailspin for a year or two, kind of, got my stuff together in the illusion of control kind of way for a few years there. But then as it does, it continued to become more of a problem over time, as the breaks between my drinking got shorter and the lapses of drinking got more intense and longer. Um, and then eventually, over the course of about a decade, it got to a point where I was drinking every day. It was definitely dependence, withdrawals, all you name it. A pretty high level of stage 3 or 4, whatever, alcoholism. So it was bad for me. I'm very grateful that for me it was a spiritual bottom more than anything else that led to my recovery. I didn't end up on the street. I didn't end up in jail. I didn't end up with my whole family turning their back on me or anything like that. I was physically sick and I was, bottomed out in a lot of ways, but I had a lot of support, and I was just like, I reached that, I guess, moment of clarity where I was able to recognize I still have all of these things, but that's not a promise. If I keep going the direction that I'm going, there's really only one way it's going to go. It's going to get worse. And eventually I'm going to die of this disease if I don't turn around and start heading in the other direction. So that I somehow, with the help of loved ones, was able to come to that realization and just start walking in the other direction towards recovery, not knowing what lay ahead of me or how hard it would be or what it would lead to, but just realizing that was the only choice I could make at that point that wasn't headed towards disaster. So very grateful that it happened when it did, and it pretty quickly started to lead to an awakening.
The story about, I mean, there's so many of us who have those stories of recognizing, wow, my drinking is totally out of control,
Mhm.
right? Like when you don't intend to drink, but then you end up drunk. And you had mentioned, you told a story in the book about having that experience prior to going to rehab. Can you just share about that?
Yeah. I had a few experiences at the end of my drinking that were like really humbling. Um, my anxiety was extremely bad. I was basically agoraphobic. It was hard for me to go out into the world. I was medicating and self-medicating. I would go to a psychiatrist and I was on some anti-anxiety pills and stuff like that. And I would try to kind of like take breaks from drinking. I didn't want to combine the medication with the drinking. And so I was in this roller coaster ride, constantly going back between, it was like a chemistry experiment in my brain most days. Um, and so there were days when I was like paranoid, and days when I was just panic disorder and just really uncomfortable stuff. And I was commuting from my home to this little rehearsal space to work on music, um and I would go there and I would have some amount of drinks, and then I'd cool off, and then I'd come home, and like there was some way in which it made sense on some level, even though it didn't. But this one time towards the end, I went to the studio on a day that I intended um, to not drink at all. I was like, I'm in the non-drinking phase right now, and it was almost as if I was possessed. Before I knew it, I was stopping at a liquor store and getting booze, which of course I took to the studio and started drinking. I had told my girlfriend that I was going to be home in time for dinner. She had told, I don't know if it was 6 or 7 o'clock or something, and I said, "Yeah, I'll be home." I passed out at the desk, actually this desk, it was there in my studio at the time. And I woke up and I looked at my clock, and it was like 9 o'clock or something like that. And I was like 2 hours late for when, and I looked at my phone and there were text messages and voicemails, and she was obviously worried. And I'd been resting for a couple hours, so I immediately felt like I was totally sober. I snapped out of it immediately, and without thinking about it, I drove home. And I got home and she was obviously extremely upset, not just that she was so worried about me, but that I, in that state, drove home, even though to me I was like, "Oh, I'm fine now. I slept it off." And then I quickly realized, no, 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 I'm not fine. I've been drinking all day. And it was just really humbling to realize like how worried she was about me and angry, I think, at the same time, but just more than anything, so concerned to the point where she was like, I don't know what it's going to take, or what it'll even mean for our relationship, but I can't watch you, just kill yourself like this. You're obviously not well and you need help, and so she was the one who really kind of like helped me take a look in the mirror. I mean, I had already kind of reached a place where I was looking at myself in the mirror and like, okay, this is really a problem and you probably need to do something about it. But I didn't have the real kind of, um, I don't know, the fire in my belly to really take action on it until she was the one who kind of pushed me in that way. And we called my therapist together, who was somebody, I'd been kind of tipping my toes in the water of recovery. And he was just kind of waiting for me to like find that moment. And so he was very happy, to hear my voice. And when we called, and I remember very little of this, of course, I was pretty, I was in a pretty drunken state. But I remember it well enough to know that it was scary, um, but also a little exciting. I'm going to change my life. And he was able to recommend that I go to the Betty Ford Center out in the desert. And we had like 48 hours before a bed would be available. So I knew that you're supposed to drink up until you get to rehab, right? And my girlfriend said, just please don't drink, hard liquor. So I said, I won't drink any hard liquor. And I got a case of wine. And she drove me out 2 days later to the desert. And I showed up as drunk as a skunk and passed out in their detox wing. And that was the start of it for me.
Amazing. It's funny how we're just gonna have that one last hurrah before we go in.
Yeah, like already I was like ready for recovery, but it's like, yeah, but I could still get
Not
wasted.
today, Satan. Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounded like you had a really good experience at rehab. Did they after they detoxed you, and that's actually a really important point, is that if you are chemically and physically addicted to alcohol, the detox is really important, because people can have, not only just be really sick, vomiting, hallucinations, fever, all that stuff. You can actually have a seizure and die. Like, that's worst case scenario. So that it sounds like they did a really good job of keeping you safe during that process. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, there's no real pleasant way to go through detox, but
Yeah.
it's certainly better than the stuff that can be really scary. To have
Yeah.
a medical staff there to make sure that they are able to monitor you and to give you, medication, or make sure your blood pressure is not out of control, that you're not having seizures, all
Yeah.
that stuff, because people don't realize how dangerous detoxing from alcohol can be.
Yeah. It can be fatal.
Yeah.
But I don't think people talk about that a whole lot, but so they kept you safe, and then they moved you into like Gen Pop.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
That was a
jail.
scary day too. It was only a
Ooh.
couple days after I got there, and I was hoping I was going to spend like a whole week in detox, and then I'd be like feeling groovy. But no, there was like 48 hours in, whatever it was. They're like, "All right, you're stabilized enough. You can move over to the men's dorm."
That's rude.
Yeah, it was just like I was wobbling and shaking my way over
Oh,
there.
yeah. Self-conscious, feeling like everyone's looking at you.
Oh yeah, I mean, not only was I detoxing, but I was agoraphobic at that point. And
Jeez, yeah.
so it was like every single moment felt like, everyone was watching me just falling apart. But quickly I realized half, if not all of the people there were going through the same thing as me.
Yeah, we're all super self-conscious. Nobody's thinking about you.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like a couple weeks in, I looked at a couple of new people in and saw them in the state that I was probably in, and thought to myself, geez, wow, is that what I looked like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah,
So you do notice the difference, obviously.
for
Somebody who's
sure.
really just still in their really sick place, just to a couple weeks out, if you had a little bit of recovery, it's night and day how you feel and how you look. But yeah, when you're in there though, you're all in it together, and that was part of the spiritual thing also. It was
Yeah.
just feeling like people are here on their own journeys, but they're helping me. And now that I've got a few days or a couple weeks, I'm helping people that are just starting the journey. So feeling like I was being of service in some way to the people around me was meaningful, and that's kind of how the spirituality thing kind of started.
Did you, I know you had some exposure, from reading the book, had exposure to the 12 steps. So did you like fully jump in, or was it a process of sort of easing your way into it? I know that, you talk a little bit about your experience of, step one was kind of obvious, but step two was a little sticking point. But was it an eventual sort of adopting of that 12-step program?
Yeah, it took me a minute to
I mean,
warm up.
there's a lot of barriers to entry. Did you struggle with the idea of being an alcoholic, or were you just like, no, that's me?
Um, well, I had identified as an alcoholic years before that. Not, I mean, not to certain crowds, I mean, like,
Right,
I
yeah.
wouldn't say that to my family. I certainly hid it from people that would have been concerned for me.
Mhm.
But I went into rehab once before that, a few years before. And it was just kind of dipping my toe into the water of recovery, not really fully ready to commit to it 100%. And at that time, I was able to identify as an alcoholic. Um, and I went to the AA meetings. I did all the therapy that was there at that other place I went to. Um, and it was enlightening. I learned a lot, but at the same time, I was trying to find all the ways in which it didn't apply to me. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, so I can take this little bit, but that person tells a story about how, they were robbing their parents' house and, selling their body on the street, or all these things that I haven't done. So I'm not quite as bad. Therefore, I don't need to be as serious about my recovery." That's just part of the process.
Right.
First,
It
you're gonna
is.
be in denial. You're going to find any rationalization you can to justify why you're different, and how this doesn't fully apply to me. So I had to go through that whole process, and of
Mm.
course the whole spiritual thing was difficult for me at first. I wasn't somebody who necessarily believed in a god per se, and so I didn't have a working definition of what spirituality was yet for me. So, but when the second time through, when I was at Betty Ford, that was a whole different experience for me. And having experiences that felt spiritual to me was what led me to the ability to understand what the spiritual program of the 12 steps was about. And the first step was easy because my life was totally unmanageable. And I was yes, at that moment, in full acceptance of the fact that I was an alcoholic and that my way was not working. Right.
Yeah.
But 2 and 3, those steps about finding a higher power took me, a month or 2 in rehab, first to just kind of identify with the idea that, my my drug of choice had been my higher power. It wasn't working for me. This program had something to offer me that I couldn't offer myself. So that was my higher power, at first. It was just the program. But then I was able to have this epiphany about 2 months in, that it's about life and about being connected to something bigger than myself, that makes life worth living,
Yeah.
right? It's about finding meaning and finding purpose. And you can find that in the things you do, in the works you do, in the ways in which you're service to other human beings, love, connection. Those are all the things that make life worth living. And when you're in your addiction, you're getting more and more disconnected from those things. So that's
Right.
how I connected finally with the 12 steps.
And what was your process of going through the four-step like? I mean, the four-step was like magical for me. And I'm always like, oh, what was your experience like? Like, did you recognize patterns of behavior? Did you like balk at your part, or did you have to get help with that part? What was your four-step experience like?
It was kind of funny because I went to an outpatient program right after I left Betty Ford, and I
Betty Ford
kind of
was like 30 days.
30 days inpatient and then 30 days in like a sober living house.
Okay.
But that was a pretty intense program, and I wasn't like I didn't have my who would become my sponsor yet at that point. I
Mhm.
was in this program there. Um, and then I went home and went to this outpatient program that was not 12-step based for about 4 months. So about 6 months in was when I found my real sponsor and really started working the steps and started over again at that point. And we worked, but this guy, he said, I worked the steps faster and more intensely than anyone he's ever met in his life.
Wow, that's awesome. You were just so ready.
I was so ready, but it also was like a remnant of that perfectionism.
Yeah.
You know, it was
Yeah.
like, if I'm going to be a sober person, I'm going to be the best
The
sober
best.
person there's ever been.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to show this guy.
I'm gonna win.
Yeah, I'm going to win sobriety.
Which you have. Yay. That's awesome. So the fourth step, was that like an eye-opening experience, or what was that like?
I think by that point I had done so much work already, and I was
Ah,
so like really been reflecting on myself for like 6 months and really doing the work on every level, that when I finally did it, it was more of just an exercise of putting it all on a piece of paper and then saying, you know, the fifth step, of course, saying
yeah,
it all,
sharing it all.
sharing it with my sponsor, and just giving it up, and really, and he did have feedback that, as you said, you know, kind of pinpointed some patterns and things that I hadn't been able to pinpoint myself. But it was more of a just kind of a cathartic experience, you know, to just
Yeah.
really put it down and really put it out there.
Yeah, it's such I found it to be such an amazing experience. That was the first time I didn't do rehab. I actually didn't know that that was a thing
Right.
when I got sober. I got sober in 94. I didn't know rehab. I'm so jealous of people who get to go to rehab. It's like, oh, you got to go somewhere for 30 days and do nothing but like work on it. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I want to do it again.
Right. But for me, the fourth step was like it's like I couldn't deny the patterns. It was like in black and white, like my self-esteem was taking hit after hit. I
Mhm.
had no like emotional security or financial security. And then I was seeking it. I was making other people responsible for my behavior and trying to take responsibility, like manage other people's, lives so that I could feel better about it was just so crazy the first time I did it. But the hardest part for me was, that last column. When you look at your part, they say it's hard to read a label from inside the jar. that's
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of that's kind of how I felt.
Mhm.
And so having somebody that was like, oh, have you considered this or considered that or things like that, I found that to be super had then alternatives to what I had, like in terms of behavior, like what some alternatives were.
Yeah,
Like maybe I didn't have to like have the last word all the time, or do you know what I mean?
sure.
Like those, like I didn't know what else to do. So it was nice to have somebody that would tell me what else I could have done in those situations.
Right.
Yeah, that was awesome. And in terms, did you do like the 9 step, made amends and all that?
I got a little stuck on the 9th step. I because I did a whole 8th step with my sponsor, and I kept getting
Made
this.
a list.
Yeah, I made the whole list of all the people that I wanted to make amends to, and uh, he kept giving me the same feedback. He was like, "Do you think this person really like is holding a grudge, or is this something that if you ask them, they would say that this was something you need to make amends for?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know," because I guess what he was saying was like, these I build things up in my own head so much.
Mm,
So it was really more of a process of my letting things go, more than it was, you know,
wow.
because, you know, sometimes there is that clause in there, you know, about unless it would harm
Them or
somebody.
others.
Like, do you
Yeah.
really need to bring something up with, you know, an ex-girlfriend when like your relationship, you know, kind of ended the way it was supposed to? It's there's closure. Like, do you really need to go dig things up? So that kind of thing, it was just like, okay, cross that one off the list. But there were,
Yeah.
you know, the important people that obviously that I needed to address and that I needed to make some amends with. I did, you know. But that's an ongoing process, right? You know, it's something
Sure.
you need to
Living
do.
amends. Yeah.
Right.
So there's two schools of thoughts about putting yourself on that list. Some people are like, oh, you beat yourself up enough. You don't need to be on the list. And then there's other people that's like, you should put yourself on the list because a living amends to yourself is about taking good care of yourself. Did your sponsor have any opinions about that?
I don't remember him saying that specifically, but that definitely was a part of my mindset, you know, just treating myself with a little more grace, you know, and I got that feedback a lot in groups, you know, people saying like, you know, take it easy on yourself, like you put
Oh,
too much pressure on yourself. And I was like, yeah, easier said than done. But when you have people that are really supportive, you know, saying that to you over and over again and realizing like, you know, it's okay to not do everything on 11, you know. It's okay to give yourself a little bit of grace, and it's okay to fall on your ass sometimes and
yeah.
have to get back up. Um, I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in recovery, you know. I I say when I talk about my perfectionism now, even with my supervisor at work, um, I always joke. I say I only use it for good now. Because I can't stop
Right.
being meticulous. I'm somebody who cares about detail, and I want
Yeah.
things to be just right. And like in writing this book, I know that I held myself to a high standard in terms of it really being as good as it could be.
Yeah.
However, I stopped short of an expectation that's unreasonable or unrealistic, or beating
Right.
myself up to the point where it becomes hindering of that process. It's
Right.
okay to have high standards. It's different to have, I think personally, it's different to have high standards and to want to achieve excellence,
Mhm.
um, and to be perfectionistic. Perfectionistic is, disabling. It prevents you from
Yeah,
achieving excellence.
it does.
It becomes the enemy of the good, right?
It does.
I think you can find a balance where you push yourself and you have drive to be the best you can be, but you also have grace for yourself. You
Mhm.
allow yourself to make mistakes. You allow yourself to just not have the answers sometimes, and to just have to sit with, the discomfort of something being imperfect.
Right. Man, that is new territory, right?
Yeah.
Really easier easier said than done.
Right.
Well, I think I want everyone to read your book. I found it to be, you have so many great stories in the book. I know you're doing a lot of work, and it's like, it's sometimes these mixed blessings. It's like I always thought of alcoholism as the best worst thing that ever happened to me, because it gave me like this whole new life I never could have imagined. And it's so interesting now that you have this platform, because of all your experiences, that people are paying attention, and you have the ability to, use all those stories and, use it for good. You can use your powers for good now.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, kind of the purpose of this book, Harder to Breathe.
Yeah.
Um, because I found it so meaningful when I would tell my story in groups and people responded to it. Both with, that story gave me hope. That story was helped me learn about recovery, and
Yeah.
inspired me to keep putting one foot in front of the other. That was so meaningful that I just felt I can do this on a bigger scale. My story is unique in some ways. It's a story that people hopefully will be interested in because it's inspiring, and it's about a band, and it's about, um, a whole journey that's maybe a little unique compared to a lot of people, but it's so hopefully relatable as well for what I went through and what I continue to work on, that anyone in any walk of life can relate to the struggle, and hopefully relate to the hope of recovery.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, I've heard hope as being hearing other people's experiences, right? And I think we all struggle with this level of, or this idea of like terminal uniqueness. I heard it said in the beginning when I first got sober, it's terminal uniqueness. I'm different. They don't understand my situation. But it's so interesting how maybe the circumstances are different, but the feelings are all the same. And I can tell, like, when you speak from your heart, like that is something that cuts through, all socioeconomic or experiences, right? Like when people speak the language of their heart, it's like message received, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what helps us to feel so connected, is like that energy of just being authentic and in touch with yourself.
Yeah, that was really my goal in writing this book more than anything else, was to really just put it on the page what I was feeling, to really give the
Yeah.
experience of vulnerability,
Hmm.
to be truly honest. And I just felt that, the reader is going to be able to sense if I'm holding something back. And what good is that going to do anyone, right? And so
Right.
even when I was writing it, there were times when I was like, man, this is pretty vulnerable stuff. And I was like, is anyone going to like me after reading this book?
Is anyone gonna like?
But it,
And yes, the answer is yes.
thank you. Well, I appreciate that, but it was a, it's hard work to allow yourself to be that vulnerable, but
Yeah.
that's an important part of the process, and it was therapeutic for me to write this book,
Yeah.
and I hope that people find some inspiration in that, in terms of allowing themselves to be vulnerable in that way, because to grow you have to open yourself up in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Ryan, I just love the book. I am so excited for the potential this has to reach so many people. I just know that you're going to do great work in your professional career as well. And I'm just excited to see how things pan out for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Anytime. Thank you so much.